Would you stop to help a lost stranger, even if it meant losing everything you had? Elijah Miller was only 18, but the weight of the world already seemed to rest on his thin shoulders. A cold wind swept through the narrow streets of Milltown, a quiet place where winter's breath lingered long after the first frost. Elijah's mother had passed 2 years ago, and since then, survival had been his only companion. He worked as a delivery boy, pedaling his late mother's old bicycle, a rusted frame with squeaky pedals and a rickety back rack that looked like it could give out any moment. The bike was more than just a means of work, it was a memory, a link to the woman who had once held his hand as they walked these same streets. But now, those streets felt colder, emptier. His life was a constant race against time, deliver groceries, run medicine, carry parcels. Whatever someone needed, Elijah would find a way to deliver it, yet the pay was barely enough. His weekly rent at the cramped boarding house hung over him like a dark cloud, and missing a single payment meant sleeping outside. On this particular evening, the sky had begun to darken early. The wind bit at his cheeks, and the grey clouds overhead whispered of snow. Elijah checked the time on his old, cracked phone, 7:45 p.m. He had one last delivery to make, a small package for Mrs. Jacobs across town. If he could just complete it before 8, he would have enough to cover his rent for the week. But his stomach twisted with a familiar fear: one wrong turn, one delay, and he'd be locked out, his belongings tossed onto the icy steps. As he tightened the strap of his delivery bag across his chest, Elijah noticed a figure at the old bus stop. An elderly woman stood alone, wrapped in a beige woolen coat that had seen better years. Her silver hair peeked out from beneath a worn hat, and her frail hands clutched a tattered leather purse. She looked up and down the street, her face clouded with confusion. The bus stop was empty except for her. Elijah's grip tightened on the handlebars. He didn't have time for this. Every second mattered now. But something about the woman's stillness struck him, not like someone waiting, but like someone lost. He glanced at the clock again, 9:48. Panic bubbled in his chest. If he missed the delivery, he'd lose his place to sleep. But then the woman's faint voice drifted to him, carried by the wind. Garden Street? Or was it Willow Lane? No. 12 bus? She muttered, her voice shaky. Elijah looked back at his bike, then at her. The weight of choice pressed on him. He could ride away, pretend he hadn't seen her, and make it to his delivery on time. Or, he sighed, wheeled his bike closer, and spoke softly. Ma'am, are you all right? The woman's gaze snapped to him, a mix of surprise and relief. I was trying to get home, but I must have missed the bus. Or maybe it missed me. Her laugh was small, fragile, like a crack in glass. Where do you live? Elijah asked, trying to keep his voice steady. She fumbled with her purse, pulling out buttons, a handkerchief, a faded bus ticket, nothing useful. But then he saw Ita's silver pendant on a delicate chain around her neck. He leaned in, reading the inscription. Margaret Hayes, 48, Oak Hill Drive. His stomach sank. Oak Hill was on the far side of town, nearly 2 hours away by bike, most of it uphill. Elijah's mind raced. He would miss the delivery, lose his room, be out in the cold. But as he looked into her clouded, worried eyes, he knew he couldn't leave her here. That's a bit far, but I think I can get you there, he whispered, trying to sound braver than he felt. He wrapped his jacket around her shoulders, then helped her onto the rickety back rack of his bike, tying his scarf around the seat to make it more comfortable. Hold on tight, he murmured, feeling the cold wind cut through his thin sweater. Margaret's trembling hands gripped his shoulders as he began to pedal, each turn of the wheel feeling heavier than the last. The road stretched endlessly, the sky darkened to a deep indigo, and the air grew sharper with each passing minute. They passed sleeping fields, crossed narrow bridges, bathed in moonlight, and climbed long, sloping hills that made Elijah's legs burn with each push. But Margaret's soft voice, sometimes humming an old tune, sometimes murmuring questions, kept him going. "We're almost there," he whispered, even when they weren't, even when he didn't know if they'd ever make it. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, the iron gates of 48 Oak Hill Drive came into view, covered in climbing ivy and chipped white paint. Elijah's legs ached, his hands were numb, but he breathed a sigh of relief. He helped Margaret off the bike, steadying her as she found her balance. The door opened, and the door opened, revealing the warm, inviting glow of the house. "Miss Hayes, we've been worried sick." Margaret smiled weakly. "I went for a ride." She looked at Elijah, her eyes warm. "Thank you, young man." "Thank you." Elijah only nodded, too exhausted to speak. He turned, climbed back onto his bike, and pedaled away, unaware of how this single act of kindness would soon change his life forever. Elijah's legs ached with every push of the pedals. The road to Oak Hill Drive stretched before him like a twisting grey ribbon, climbing ever upward, each hill steeper than the last. The wind grew sharper, biting at his cheeks, and the chills seeped through his thin sweater. But he didn't slow down, not even when the darkness thickened around them and the street lamps became fewer, their pale light swallowed by the trees. Margaret Hayes sat quietly behind him, her frail hands gripping the sides of his coat. She murmured softly now and then, her voice fading in and out. Sometimes she hummed a tune, an old lullaby perhaps, her voice a gentle thread in the cold night air. Other times she would ask the same question, "Are we close?" And Elijah would answer, each time with the same calm, "Almost there. Just a little further." But each time he said it, the words felt heavier. His arms trembled with the strain, his legs were on fire, and the biting wind seemed to cut deeper with every minute, yet he kept going. Each pedal was a promise, not just to Margaret, but to himself. A promise that he wouldn't turn back, wouldn't give in. The fields around them were silent, the tall grass bending under the weight of frost. A lone barn loomed in the distance, its dark shape like a ghost, watching them pass. They crossed a narrow bridge, the sound of water rushing below, a constant murmur beneath the quiet. And then, just as Elijah thought his legs might give out, they reached a small gas station, its single neon sign flickering weakly. "Let's rest for a moment," he whispered, pulling to a stop. He helped Margaret down, guiding her to a small bench beside the store. Her hands were like ice, her breath visible in the cold air. I must be such a bother," she murmured, a faint blush on her pale cheeks. "No, ma'am. Not at all," Elijah replied, forcing a smile. "You just sit here. I'll be right back." He pushed open the door of the small store, the warm air washing over him like a gentle hug. The clerk barely looked up from his magazine as Elijah counted out the last few coins in his pocket. It was just enough for a small cup of hot tea. As he stepped outside, steam rising from the cup, he handed it to Margaret. "You should drink this. It'll help warm you up." But the old woman smiled, a soft, tender smile that seemed to melt a little of the cold around them. "You have it, dear. You need it more." "No, please, I got it for you," Elijah insisted, pressing it gently into her hands. Margaret hesitated, then took a small sip, her trembling hands wrapping around the warm cup. "You remind me of someone," she whispered. "My grandson, always kind, even when the world wasn't." Elijah tried to smile, but the exhaustion was catching up to him. He glanced at his bike, the rusty frame glinting under the dim light. Part of him wondered if he'd even make it the rest of the way, but he couldn't think like that. "Not now. Ready?" he asked softly. Margaret nodded, a little strength returning to her voice. "Yes, I believe I am." Helping her back onto the bike, Elijah wrapped his thin scarf around her once more. He tightened his grip on the handlebars, felt the cold metal bite at his fingers, and began pedaling again. The darkness seemed even deeper now, the road stretching endlessly before them. The hills felt steeper, the turns sharper. But through it all, Margaret's presence was a gentle comfort. Even when she was silent, even when her head drooped with weariness, she was there. A quiet reminder that sometimes the journey was worth the struggle. As they climbed the final hill, the lights of Oak Hill Drive appeared in the distance, soft golden dots glowing against the black sky. Elijah's heart raced, his breath coming in sharp gasps. He whispered encouragement to himself, to Margaret, to the bike that creaked and groaned beneath their weight. And then, at long last, the white iron gate of 48 Oak Hill came into view, draped in ivy and shadow. Elijah coasted to a stop, his legs shaking so badly he nearly fell. He helped Margaret down, and she stood for a moment, looking up at the grand house before her. It's home," she whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. "You brought me home." The door swung open, a tall man in a housecoat rushing out, his face pale with shock and relief. "Miss Hayes, we've been so worried." Margaret smiled, a weary but warm smile. "I just went for a little adventure," she murmured. Elijah leaned against his bike, his breath a foggy cloud in the cold air. The man turned to him, his expression a mix of gratitude and disbelief. Did you bring her all the way here?" "Yes, sir." Elijah nodded, barely able to stand. "Just wanted to make sure she got home safe." "Thank you." "Thank you so much. Please, come inside, warm up, have something to eat." But Elijah shook his head. I should get back. It's getting late." "Please, let us help you," the man insisted. But Elijah was already climbing back onto his bike. He looked at Margaret one last time. "Take care, ma'am." Margaret's hand reached out just for a moment, a gentle touch on his arm. "And you too, young man. Don't forget. Sometimes the hardest roads lead to the best places." Elijah smiled, a tired, grateful smile. And then he turned, his bike wobbling slightly as he pedaled away into the night, unaware that this small act of kindness had just set something far greater into motion. Elijah's hands were numb as he pedaled back toward the town, the cold wind slicing against his face. Each breath felt sharp, each turn of the pedal a struggle. But beneath the exhaustion, a quiet warmth lingered, the memory of Margaret Hayes's smile, the way she had clung to his arm and whispered, "You brought me home." But as the familiar streets of Milltown came into view, that warmth quickly faded, replaced by a gnawing dread. His legs burned, his fingers ached, but Elijah pushed forward, the streetlights glowing dimly in the thickening night. His boarding house stood at the end of the block, a narrow two-story building with peeling paint and a porch light that never worked. He leaned his bike against the railing, fumbled in his pockets and felt nothing. Panic clawed at his chest. He searched again, every pocket of his thin jacket, his jeans empty. His key was gone. He knocked on the door, first softly, then louder. Silence. The landlord's window upstairs remained dark. Elijah's breath fogged in the air, his heart pounding. He glanced down, and that's when he saw Ithis' belongings, bundled in a plastic bag beside the door. A cracked phone charger, a threadbare shirt, and an old book. Taped to the door was a note, 3 words scrawled in thick black marker. Past due. Locks changed. Elijah's chest tightened. He stood there for a long moment, the cold pressing in around him. He wanted to scream, to cry, to punch the door until his knuckles bled. But instead, he just stood, staring at the plastic bag, his breath shaking. After what felt like an eternity, he picked up the bag, slung it over his shoulder, and climbed back onto his bike. His legs ached, his head throbbed, but he needed to keep moving. The cold seemed sharper now, cutting through his thin sweater, sinking into his bones. The streets of Milltown were quiet, the shops long closed, the windows dark. Elijah rode aimlessly at first, unsure of where to go. His mind raced. Where could he sleep? Who could he turn to? But every answer led to a dead end. It was nearly midnight when he passed the back alley of Carter's Market, a small corner store run by Mr. Carter, a gruff but kind man who sometimes let Elijah restock shelves for a few dollars. Desperation guiding him, Elijah parked his bike behind the dumpster and knocked on the side door. For a moment, there was nothing but the hollow sound of the wind. Then, a light flickered on inside. The door creaked open, and there stood Mr. Carter, wrapped in a heavy robe, a steaming mug in his hand. His tired eyes narrowed as he looked at Elijah, shivering in the cold. Elijah. "Didn't make rent, huh?" Elijah nodded, trying to keep his voice steady. "Yeah, I'm sorry to bother you, Mr. Carter." I didn't know where else to go." Mr. Carter sighed, a long, weary sigh that seemed to hang in the cold air. "Well, the storeroom's dry and there's a cot in the corner." "Don't touch the wine crates and don't freeze to death on me." Relief washed over Elijah. Thank you so much," Mr. Carter grunted, stepping aside to let Elijah in. The storeroom smelled of cardboard and citrus, the only heat coming from an old radiator that groaned with each breath of warmth it gave. Elijah set his meager belongings on the cot, wrapped himself in the thin blanket, and let his tired body collapse. The cold lingered in his bones, but the walls shielded him from the biting wind, and the darkness felt more like a blanket than a prison. For the first time in hours, Elijah let himself close his eyes. Images flashed in his mind, Margaret's fragile smile, her quiet hum as they rode through the darkness, the relief in her eyes as she stepped through the gate of her home. Had it been worth it? He had missed the delivery, lost his place to sleep, and now he was curled up in a storeroom, clutching a blanket that barely kept the cold away. But as exhaustion pulled him deeper, a small warmth stirred in his chest. Yes, it was worth it. Sleep came slowly, a restless drift between the ache of his muscles and the constant hum of the radiator. But at some point, in the quiet darkness, he felt a strange sense of calm, a whisper of peace he hadn't known in months. Morning came with a soft grey light that slipped through the frosted window. Elijah woke with a shiver, his breath a thin mist in the cool air. He folded the blanket, tucked it against the wall, and stepped out into the front of the store. Mr. Carter was already there, setting out a tray of bread, his face a mask of tired routine. He looked up, saw Elijah, and grunted, "Banana and a coffee. Don't ask for more." Elijah's lips curled into a small smile. "Thanks." He took the banana, peeled it slowly, and stood by the window, watching the town come to life. People shuffled along the sidewalks, cars exhaled puffs of steam, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once and then was silent. For a moment, it felt like just another day. But to Elijah, it wasn't. He was still homeless, still struggling, but he was warm. He was safe, at least for now. And as he stared out at the quiet streets, his thoughts drifted back to Margaret Hayes. Did she make it through the night okay? Did she remember him? Or was he just another face she would forget? But before he could lose himself in those thoughts, the sound of an engine cut through the morning quiet. A sleek black car pulled up to the curb, too polished for this part of town. Elijah's chest tightened as the door opened, and a tall man stepped out, his coat too fine for Milltown. The man glanced at a slip of paper, then looked directly through the store window, his eyes landing on Elijah, like he had always known where to find him. The bell over the door chimed, and the man stepped in, the room shrinking around him. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I'm looking for someone named Elijah Miller." Elijah's heart raced. "That's me." Elijah's heart pounded in his chest. The man standing in Carter's Market seemed out of place, tall, well-dressed, his coat finely tailored, his shoes unscuffed. Everything about him was too polished for Milltown, and yet his eyes were focused on Elijah, as if he had traveled across miles just for this moment. "I'm looking for someone named Elijah Miller," the man repeated, his voice smooth but firm. Elijah hesitated, 1,000 thoughts racing through his mind. Had something happened to Margaret? Had she forgotten him? Or worse, had she accused him of something? But he swallowed his fear and stepped forward. "That's me." The man's expression softened, relief flickering in his eyes. "Good. I'm Mr. Franklin. I work for Margaret Hayes. She asked me to find you." Elijah's breath caught. "Mrs. Hayes, is she okay?" "Yes, she's fine." "Better than fine, actually. She remembers everything you did for her. She insisted I find you and bring you to see her." Elijah's mind spun. This felt surreal. The memory of that cold, exhausting ride up to Oak Hill was still fresh, his aching legs, the biting wind, the way he'd almost given up. And now, here was a man sent to find him. "Why?" I don't understand," Elijah stammered. I just helped her get home." "And that's exactly why she wants to see you again," Mr. Franklin replied, a faint smile touching his lips. "Mrs. Hayes is a woman who doesn't forget kindness." Behind the counter, Mr. Carter grunted, pretending not to listen, but his curious glance betrayed him. Elijah looked at him, seeking some kind of silent advice. Mr. Carter shrugged, his usual gruff mask barely hiding a hint of pride. "Go on, kid. I'll keep the cot warm if you need it." Elijah nodded, a faint smile breaking through his nerves. "Thank you, Mr. Carter." Mr. Franklin led Elijah to the sleek black car parked outside. The door opened with a soft click, the leather seats too smooth, the air too warm. Elijah hesitated before climbing in, his fingers gripping his worn jacket. As the car pulled away, the familiar streets of Milltown seemed to blur, the small shops and faded houses slipping into the past. The drive to Oak Hill felt different in the daylight. The narrow roads were lined with frost-kissed trees, their branches reaching toward a pale grey sky. Elijah stared out the window, his mind racing. What could Margaret Hayes possibly want with him? Was she angry? Was this some kind of test? But as the car turned onto the winding path leading to the grand white house, Elijah's anxiety gave way to awe. The mansion stood like a quiet sentinel, its white walls softened by climbing ivy, its tall windows glowing with a gentle light. Mr. Franklin led Elijah through a side entrance, past a hallway lined with old portraits and shelves of dusty books. The air smelled faintly of lavender and aged wood, and there, in a cozy room bathed in warm sunlight, Margaret Hayes waited. But this wasn't the frail, confused woman he remembered. She was sitting by a large window, her silver hair neatly pinned, her eyes bright and clear. When she saw Elijah, her face lit up, a smile breaking over her like the dawn. "You," she breathed, her voice steady and warm. "You brought me home." Elijah's throat tightened. "Yes, ma'am." Margaret stood, moving with a grace that surprised him. She crossed the room and reached for his hands, her grip gentle but firm. "I remember every moment, every word. You didn't just help me find my house. You made me feel safe. I just didn't want you to get lost," Elijah whispered, feeling the heat rise in his cheeks. Margaret smiled, her gaze soft but unwavering. "And that is why I want you here. You see, Elijah, I have lived in this house for a very long time. It's grand, yes, but it has never felt more empty than it did before you found me. You reminded me of something I had forgotten, that there is kindness in the world." Elijah's heart pounded. "I don't understand. Why would you?" "Because I owe you a debt I can never repay," she said simply. "And because I have more than enough. Too many rooms, too many empty halls. But you, You gave me something money can't buy, Hope. She gestured for him to sit, and as he did, Mr. Franklin brought in a silver tray with tea and small pastries. Elijah hesitated, unsure if he should touch anything, but Margaret laughed gently. Please, eat. You look like you've been living on the edge of a shadow. Elijah's stomach growled at the smell of the warm pastries, and he finally let himself relax, taking a small bite. The buttery taste melted on his tongue, and he realized just how hungry he was. Margaret leaned forward, her expression softening. Elijah, I want you to stay here, not just for a night, but for as long as you need. I have no family left, and this house needs someone who can bring it back to life. Stay? Here? Elijah's voice was barely a whisper. It didn't seem real. Yes. Your own room, warm meals, a chance to rest. And if you wish, I can help you return to school. But I don't deserve this. I didn't do anything. Oh, but you did. In a world where most would have walked away, you stopped. You cared. Silence hung between them, gentle but heavy. Elijah's hands trembled slightly, his mind racing between disbelief and a deep, quiet gratitude. Will you accept, Elijah? Margaret asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Elijah swallowed hard, the warmth of the room pressing against the cold emptiness he had known for so long. Yes. Yes, I will. Margaret's smile widened, her eyes misting just slightly. Then welcome home, Elijah. And in that moment, for the first time in years, Elijah felt a strange, unfamiliar sense of peace, a sense of belonging. Elijah spent his first night at Margaret Hayes's mansion feeling like he had stepped into a dream. His room was small but warm, the bed soft and clean, a thick quilt draped over him that seemed to hug him against the chill of the outside world. The scent of lavender lingered in the air, and for the first time in months, he slept without shivering. Morning came gently, a pale light seeping through the curtains. Elijah stirred, blinking against the soft glow, and for a moment he forgot where he was. But then the memory washed over him, the ride through the cold night, Margaret's kind eyes, her words inviting him to stay. He sat up, his heart pounding with a quiet excitement he hadn't felt in so long. A light knock at his door pulled him from his thoughts. Elijah? Margaret's voice, gentle but clear. Yes, ma'am, he called, quickly pulling on his faded sweater. The door opened, and Margaret stood there, a warm smile on her face. Good morning, dear. I hope you slept well. I did. Thank you. Wonderful. Breakfast is ready in the sunroom whenever you're hungry. No rush. This is your home now, and you should always feel comfortable. Her words settled over him like a soft blanket. Elijah nodded, still feeling a mix of awe and gratitude. He followed her down the grand hallway, past old portraits whose painted eyes seemed to follow his every step, and into the sunroom, a bright, cozy space with tall windows that overlooked a frost-kissed garden. A small table was set with a pot of tea, fresh bread, eggs, and a bowl of fruit. Elijah hesitated at the doorway, but Margaret waved him in. Please, help yourself. As he ate, she sat across from him, sipping her tea. Elijah, I meant what I said yesterday. This is your home for as long as you wish. You're not a guest, you're family. Family. The word felt strange, almost distant. Elijah had lost his mother 2 years ago, and with her, he'd lost any sense of belonging. But here was this woman, this stranger turned savior, offering him a place not just to stay, but to belong. I don't know how to thank you, he whispered, his voice catching. You already have, Margaret replied, her smile warm and genuine. But there is something I'd like your help with, if you're willing. Of course. Anything. Margaret's expression grew thoughtful. I have lived in this house for so long, and for many years it has been just a place, a collection of empty rooms. But meeting you, it reminded me of something I had forgotten. That a home is not just a building, but a place where kindness can grow. Elijah listened intently, leaning forward slightly. "I want to do something more with what I have," she continued, "to help others who might be struggling like you were. I was thinking of creating a foundation, a place that offers support, shelter, and opportunities for young people who have nowhere to go. And I would like you to help me shape it." Elijah's eyes widened. "Me? But I don't know anything about that." "Perhaps not yet. But you know what it means to struggle, to feel lost, and you know what it means to be kind, even when life is unkind to you. That is a greater wisdom than most people ever learn." Her words settled into his heart, warm and heavy. I would love to help." Margaret's smile brightened. "Then we shall call it the Bright Horizons Foundation, a place where hope can always be found, even in the darkest times." Days turned to weeks, and Elijah found himself not just living in the mansion, but truly becoming a part of it. Margaret was patient, teaching him about how foundations worked, how to set up programs, how to reach out to the community. But more than that, she taught him the value of listening, of understanding the struggles of others. Elijah often spent his mornings walking through the garden with Margaret, her stories of the past filling the crisp air, stories of a young girl who had once been full of dreams, stories of loss, of resilience. And in return, he shared his mother's laughter, the cold nights he spent working just to keep a roof over his head, the way the wind felt that night when he thought he had lost everything. But as the foundation began to take shape, it wasn't just Elijah and Margaret who found new purpose. People from the town began to hear of the Bright Horizons Foundation. Young men and women, struggling to find their way, came seeking guidance, a place to belong. Elderly neighbors, once isolated, found comfort in the community gatherings Margaret hosted in her grand living room. Elijah saw lives change, young people finding jobs, elders smiling again as they shared stories and meals. And through it all, he never forgot that it all began with a single choice to help a lost woman at a bus stop. One evening, as they sat by the crackling fireplace, Margaret looked at Elijah, her gaze soft but thoughtful. "Elijah, I never asked you what your dreams are." He hesitated. I never really thought about them." "I've always just tried to survive." "But now you don't have to just survive," she whispered. "You can dream." Elijah's chest tightened. For so long, he had lived with his head down, always focused on the next meal, the next night's shelter. But now, sitting here in the warmth of the fire, with Margaret's gentle eyes watching him, he allowed himself a thought he hadn't dared in years. "I think I would like to go back to school, to learn, to maybe help others the way you've helped me." Margaret's smile grew, a soft joy lighting her face. "Then, that is exactly what we will do." And for the first time in his young life, Elijah felt something stronger than gratitude. He felt hope. The Bright Horizons Foundation came to life faster than Elijah could have imagined. What began as an idea between him and Margaret Hayes became a living, breathing beacon of hope. The grand mansion, once filled with silence, now bustled with quiet energy, people coming and going, voices filled with laughter, soft conversations held over tea in the sunroom, and the gentle hum of hope being restored. Margaret's vision was simple. A place where young people without a home could find shelter, where the elderly who had lost their families could find companionship, and where anyone struggling could discover a path forward. Elijah watched in awe as her idea blossomed. Flyers were posted around Milltown, and soon the mansion welcomed its first visitors. Elijah's role grew quickly. He wasn't just a helper, he became Margaret's right hand. He met with newcomers, listened to their stories, guided them to rooms, and helped them settle in. He worked with Margaret to develop programs, basic education for young adults who had dropped out, creative workshops for seniors, job training for those looking to rebuild their lives. The more he helped, the more he realized that he wasn't just giving, he was healing too. Each person he met brought a piece of their struggle, their pain, but also their strength. And in helping them, Elijah began to understand the depth of his own resilience. One cold, misty morning, Elijah was setting up chairs in the sunroom for the weekly story circle, an event where the residents shared memories, wisdom, or simply listened to one another, when he heard a soft voice behind him. "Elijah!" It was Margaret, leaning gently on her cane, her silver hair neatly pinned. Her smile was warm, but her eyes carried a quiet concern. "Good morning, Margaret. Need some help?" Elijah asked, walking over to her. "No, dear. I actually came to ask for your help with something else." "Of course. What is it?" Margaret hesitated, her fingers lightly tracing the polished handle of her cane. "I was thinking, we've done so much here, but there are so many out there who don't know we exist. I'd like to do something more, something that brings the community together." Elijah nodded, listening closely. "A charity event," she continued, her eyes brightening. "Something that brings people here, lets them see what we're doing, but also helps us raise funds to keep it going. Maybe a small gala, music, stories, food, something that makes people feel the spirit of what we've built." A rush of excitement filled Elijah. "That sounds amazing. I can help organize it. I know some of the young people who are great with music, and maybe the elders could share stories." "We could make it something beautiful." Margaret's smile widened. "Exactly. And I want you to be the one to speak, to share your story." Elijah's enthusiasm wavered. "Me? But I'm not good at speaking in front of people." "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be honest. Your story is what began all of this. Your kindness changed my life, and through that, we are changing so many others." Elijah swallowed, a knot of nerves settling in his stomach. But as he looked at Margaret, he saw the quiet, unwavering faith in her eyes, the same faith she had shown him when she offered him a place to stay. "Okay, I'll do it," he whispered, more to himself than to her. Over the next few weeks, the mansion transformed. The grand hall was decorated with soft string lights, the walls lined with photos of the residents, smiling, laughing, living. The young musicians rehearsed in the sunroom, their melodies floating through the corridors. The kitchen filled with the warm, sweet scent of freshly baked bread and pastries prepared by the residents. Elijah worked tirelessly, but every moment felt like a gift. He helped an elderly woman named Clara write a poem she planned to read at the event. He coached young Thomas, a shy boy who had been homeless, to play his guitar confidently. He even found himself laughing more, his once guarded heart opening a little more each day. The night of the gala arrived, and the mansion glowed beneath a soft veil of evening mist. Guests from across Milltown filled the grand hall, business owners, teachers, families, all curious to see the place they had only heard whispers about. Elijah stood at the back of the room, nervously adjusting his simple suit. His palms were damp, his heart pounding. Margaret walked over, her smile gentle. "Ready?" I think so," he whispered. She placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Just speak from your heart, dear." The room quieted as Margaret stepped to the front, her voice warm and clear. She welcomed the guests, sharing the story of how the Bright Horizons Foundation began, how a young man had stopped on a cold, dark night to help her find her way home. And now, it is my great joy to introduce that young man, the heart of this place, Elijah Miller. A gentle applause filled the room as Elijah stepped forward, his throat tight. But as he looked out at the faces, Margaret's warm smile, Thomas's hopeful gaze, Clara's proud tear, she felt a steady calm. I never thought I'd be here," he began, his voice shaking just slightly. "I was just trying to survive. I had nothing but a rusty bike and a small room I could barely afford. But one night, I made a choice to help someone who needed it. And somehow, that choice changed everything. His voice grew steadier. This place is more than just a house. It's a place where kindness can grow, where people who feel lost can be found, and where hope never has to be alone. When he finished, the applause was louder. But more than that, there were tear-steers of understanding, of gratitude. Margaret embraced him, and for a moment they stood together, two souls who had once been lost, but now were found in each other. The gala was a success, but more than the funds raised, it became a symbol of what they had built. The Bright Horizons Foundation wasn't just a charity, it was a family. And as Elijah looked around the room, seeing faces bright with joy, he realized something he hadn't dared to believe before. This was home. As the weeks turned into months, the Bright Horizons Foundation grew beyond anything Elijah could have imagined. What started as a quiet sanctuary in Margaret Hayes's mansion became a place of true transformation. Young men and women who had once wandered the streets of Milltown now found purpose within those grand, ivy-covered walls. Elijah's days were a blur of activity. He helped newcomers settle in, taught basic literacy classes to those who hadn't finished school, and spent his evenings listening to the stories of the elderly who found comfort in the sunroom's warm light. He never forgot what it felt like to be alone, cold, and struggling to survive. That memory became his strength, his guide. Margaret often watched him with quiet pride. She had given him a place to stay, but he had given the mansion a heartbeat. It was no longer just a grand, empty house, it was a home. And as word of the foundation spread, so did the stories of those it had helped. One rainy afternoon, Elijah stood by the grand window in the sunroom, watching the rain streak against the glass. His thoughts wandered back to the night he first met Margaret, the cold wind, the long ride, her fragile voice asking, "Are we close?" "You're miles away," he whispered to himself, a gentle smile touching his lips. But before his thoughts could drift further, the door swung open, and a young woman stepped in, her hair dripping wet, her eyes wide with desperation. I'm sorry," she stammered, shivering slightly. I heard you help people here." "I didn't know where else to go." Elijah's smile softened. "Come in. You're safe here." He brought her a warm towel, guided her to a chair by the fire, and listened as she told her story, a familiar tale of hardship, of losing her job, of having nowhere else to turn. Elijah listened, never interrupting, never judging, and when she finished, he simply nodded. "You're welcome to stay. We'll help you get back on your feet." Moments like these became common, but never routine. Each story, each person, brought something new to the foundation. Some stayed for only a few weeks, others for months, but each one left a mark on Elijah's heart. One evening, as he was finishing some paperwork in the small office Margaret had set up for him, she entered quietly, a soft smile on her face. "Working late again, Elijah?" He looked up, chuckling. "There's always something to do." "And yet, you never seem tired." "Sometimes I am," he admitted, leaning back in the old leather chair. "But it's a good kind of tired." Margaret's smile deepened. "That's because you found something you love." Elijah paused, letting her words sink in. "I guess I have." "I've been thinking," she continued, her tone shifting slightly. "You have a gift, Elijah. A way of seeing people, of hearing them, even when they think they're invisible. And I don't want you to lose that." He frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I don't want this place to become just another organization. I don't want you to become someone who just manages it from behind a desk. Your gift is here." She touched her chest gently. "Not just in the paperwork." Elijah nodded, understanding. "I won't forget." Margaret's hand rested gently on his shoulder. "I know you won't, because you are the heart of this place." Days later, Elijah received a letter of formal invitation to speak at a youth outreach conference in the nearby city. At first, he felt a rush of panic. Public speaking still frightened him, but Margaret's words echoed in his mind. "Your gift is here." He couldn't let fear silence him. The day of the conference arrived, and as he stood backstage, the hum of the audience beyond the curtain was a steady reminder of his nerves. But then he felt a warm, familiar touch on his arm. "You'll do great," Margaret whispered, her eyes filled with pride. The lights were bright, the room vast. But as Elijah stepped onto the stage, all he saw were faces, young, old, curious, and searching. He took a deep breath. "I never thought I would be here," he began, his voice steadying with each word. "There was a time when I had nothing. No home, no family, just a rusty old bike and a desperate hope that maybe, somehow, I could make it through one more day." The room was silent, each word carrying the weight of his journey. But someone showed me kindness. Someone reminded me that even in the darkest night, there is always light if we look for it. And that light led me here too, a place where kindness is not just a word, but a way of life. When he finished, the applause was a wave that washed over him. But more than the applause, it was the faces, the young man wiping his eyes, the elderly woman smiling softly. He had reached them. He had touched them. After the speech, as he stepped off the stage, a young boy approached, his hands trembling slightly. "Mr. I never thought someone like me could ever make it." "But you did." Elijah knelt, meeting the boy's gaze. "You can, and you will." Back at the mansion, as the evening settled, Margaret waited for him in the sunroom. "How did it go?" she asked, though her smile told him she already knew. "It went better than I ever imagined," Elijah whispered, sinking into a chair beside her. Margaret's hand rested gently on his. "The world needs people who care, Elijah. People like you." As the fire crackled softly, Elijah felt a warmth that no quilt could provide. He looked at Margaret, his mentor, his family, and for the first time in his life, he didn't just feel lucky, he felt worthy. And in that quiet, firelit room, with the rain tapping gently at the window, Elijah knew he had found his place, not just at Bright Horizons, but in the world. The seasons changed, and so did Bright Horizons. What had once been a quiet mansion on Oak Hill became a beacon of hope for all of Milltown. The foundation's impact stretched beyond its walls. Young people found direction, elders found friendship, and families were built not by blood, but by kindness. Elijah Miller had become a familiar name, not just within the mansion's walls, but across the town. He was the young man who listened, who helped without judgment, who knew what it meant to be lost and found. His days were filled with purpose, but his heart was always grounded in the simple memory of that cold night, the night he chose to stop, to help. But even with all the success, Elijah never lost sight of the simple truths. Every person who walked through the mansion's doors came with a story, a struggle, and he listened to each one, never forgetting his own journey. One crisp autumn morning, as golden leaves danced in the cool breeze, Elijah found himself at the old bus stop where it had all begun. The bench was still there, its paint chipped, the rust creeping along its legs. He stood quietly, the wind brushing against his face, and he smiled. He remembered the way Margaret had looked that night, lost, frightened, but so quietly hopeful. The memory warmed him, even in the cool air. "Quite a view, isn't it?" a familiar voice called from behind. Elijah turned to see Margaret, her silver hair fluttering gently, a warm scarf wrapped around her shoulders. Her cane tapped lightly against the pavement as she walked toward him. "Margaret," he laughed, rushing to her side. "What are you doing out here?" "Oh, I thought I'd take a walk," she teased, her eyes sparkling. "And I thought I might find you here." They stood side by side, watching the quiet street stretch ahead of them. It's strange, Elijah murmured. I used to come by this place and feel desperate, like I was always one step away from falling. Margaret's hand rested gently on his arm. Sometimes, it's the places that hold our hardest memories that become the most meaningful, because they remind us of how far we've come. Elijah smiled. And you were the one who helped me realize that. No, my dear, she corrected gently. You were the one who chose to help. I just reminded you of who you truly are. They walked together, the leaves crunching beneath their feet. The streets of Milltown were alive with the soft hum of life children playing, shopkeepers waving, and the gentle scent of fresh bread drifting from the bakery. As they returned to the mansion, they passed the small garden where residents were planting tulips for spring. Elijah saw Thomas, the shy boy he had once encouraged to play guitar, now teaching another boy the basics. He saw Clara, the elderly woman who had found joy in sharing her poems, now laughing with a group of new friends. Inside, the warm light of the sunroom wrapped around them. Margaret settled into her favorite chair by the window, and Elijah sat beside her. Elijah, she whispered, her voice soft but steady. There's something I want you to know. Anything, Margaret. One day when I'm no longer here, this place, it will need someone to continue its work, someone with a heart that truly understands it. Elijah's chest tightened. Don't say that. You'll be here for a long time. She smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. Perhaps. But time has a way of slipping through our fingers. I want you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me that you'll always keep this place a place where kindness isn't just shown, but felt. Elijah leaned forward, taking her hand in his. I promise. Her eyes softened, a quiet peace settling in her gaze. I knew you would. Days turned to weeks, and then to months. Bright horizons continued to thrive, but Elijah always made time to sit with Margaret, to listen to her stories, to share quiet moments of tea and laughter. And then, one spring morning, when the tulips in the garden were in full bloom, Margaret Hayes passed peacefully in her sleep. The mansion seemed a little quieter, a little dimmer without her gentle laughter, but her presence lingered in every room, in every life she had touched. Elijah stood by the window of the sunroom, watching the garden sway in the breeze. Tears welled in his eyes, but a quiet smile touched his lips. He had lost someone dear, but he hadn't lost what she had given him. Margaret's will left everything to bright horizons, with a simple letter for Elijah. A letter that read, My dearest Elijah, you were a light in my life when I thought all had grown dark. Never forget who you are, and never stop seeing the goodness in others, just as you did with me. This place is yours now, because it was always yours in spirit. Carry on the kindness. All my love, Margaret. Elijah's tears fell freely as he folded the letter, pressing it to his heart. Years would pass, and bright horizons would grow even larger new buildings. More volunteers, countless lives changed. But at the heart of it all was a young man who had once been lost, who had once shivered in the cold and dared to help a stranger. And every year, on the anniversary of that fateful night, Elijah would visit the old bus stop, place a small bouquet of tulips on the bench, and smile. Because he knew sometimes a single act of kindness could change everything. The story of Elijah Miller and Margaret Hayes is a testament to the power of kindness and compassion. In a world where many people rush by without noticing those in need, Elijah chose to stop, to listen, and to help an elderly woman who seemed lost. That single act of kindness didn't just change Margaret's life, it transformed his own. Sometimes, it takes just one moment of empathy to create a chain of unexpected blessings. Life is a series of choices, and sometimes a small act of kindness can change everything. Elijah Miller's story reminds us that even when we feel like we have nothing, we can still choose to be kind. His simple decision to help a lost woman on a cold night not only gave her comfort, it opened doors he never imagined. Kindness has a way of coming full circle, often when we least expect it. For older Americans, Margaret's story is a reminder that it's never too late to find purpose and connection. Even after years of loneliness, she found joy and family through her bond with Elijah. No matter your age, you can still be a light in someone else's life. Sometimes, a single moment of compassion can lead to a lifetime of happiness. So take a moment to reach out, to listen, to care. You never know how one small act can change your life or someone else's.